I'll start by talking about the first house. The first house in the astrological chart, the natal chart. The first house is the house of new beginning. A new beginning where life suddenly springs forth. The ascendant is that point, which is the ascendant is the beginning of the first house. But it is that point wherein which awareness, right, manifests as an individual. Prior to that, awareness exists in a watery state, because just before the ascendant is the 12th house. In fact, any degree of the ascendant in backwards direction, it's Pisces, and Pisces is a watery world, you see, and that tells us about the condition of the infant, of the fetus in the womb. It's in a watery world because it has to pass through that watery world to get to this level, this world of ours, which is signified by the process of individuation, where you suddenly come into existence. It is the act of being. It means that at some point just prior you were not, and then at some other point just after that you are. And that process, that transition, is the process of birth. So the first house, where the ascendant is the launch pad. You understand how individuation, how being, how ego is launched into the world. But ego doesn't even know what it is in the first house, because it doesn't need to know. It only knows that it is alive. It doesn't know what it is. So the ascendant is an extremely important point in the natal chart. It represents that moment awareness is individuated. It's just the process it does, because it doesn't even know that it's an individual. It just knows that it is alive. That is it. It's no longer in the watery world. This is, can you imagine an infant, a newly born infant, just trying to understand where it is? Because it spent you can't say it spent the last 9 months, because it's not an infant like that in 9 months. It probably starts being able to hear around 5 months, and hearing, you really cannot hear sounds you don't understand, or sounds you've never, not. We're talking about a developing brain. It doesn't have a history or a memory of what sounds actually sound like. It doesn't know anything, and then it starts hearing these vibrations through the water. It doesn't know what to make of it. It doesn't even know that they are vibrations. It just perceives it as a background noise. That's really what it is. A background noise in a watery world. It has no being, so it is really nothing. Now, the gap between nothing is deliberate. I don't mean that it is nothing, but from its point of view, it is not a thing yet. It is developing. So it's just for a few months that it learns to hear, to see, and it doesn't even know what it's hearing, it doesn't know what it's seeing. It just knows that certain things are associated with its environment. For instance, its mother, it knows that when the mother begins to make some kind of noise like laughing, you see, it knows that changes the mood of the mother, and that change in mood changes the chemistry of its watery environment. It knows this, so it learns to associate certain things with the way that it feels, especially those sounds. That's why the two most common sounds it hears are those from its mother and those from its father. It comes to associate these sounds, together and relate it to itself. So it begins to have an idea, but it is not an individual yet. It becomes an individual when it takes its first gulp of air. And that's when we say that a child is born. And that point where a child is born represents the ascendant. The ascendant is really the container within which all aspects of the chart fall in. Meaning, everything in the chart must be interpreted in the context of an ascendant. Because the ascendant is the initial flash of sensorial experience, rapid sensorial experience, the first imprint of that on the brain, the first imprint of that in the lungs from the oxygen, the air that the child breathes in. Remember, the child's lungs are crumpled in the womb. The child doesn't breathe air in the womb, so the lungs are crumpled. So that first injection of air and the harshness of oxygen, it burns an imprint into the lungs. That is the ascendant. It also burns that into the brain. That is the ascendant, and it is the background context within which every experience of your life will be played. I cannot overstate the importance of the ascendant. Some astrologers tend to think that the ascendant is just a mask that you wear. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's not a mask. You never take it off. The ascendant is what you are when you first came into being. Everything else that will develop, especially the sun, which has tremendous impact, will be developed within the context of that ascendant. You see? Because the ascendant is the first information, even though it exists as a kind of diffuse, because it colors the entire chart. You see, it is what can be described as your base consciousness. That's your ascendant. You see. Now the sun, the sun represents like your will and your focus. I tend to like to describe the sun as your focus. So your sun sign really is the point where your sun sign is how you exercise your will, how you exercise your focus. It is the focus of the ego. We'll get to that point. So that's basically what the first house is. In the natural chart, the first house is governed by Aries. And that's the nature of Aries. You see, the glyph of Aries is the ram. So Aries is the reality of being. That's all it is. It is not an extremely conscious sign. You see, it is so enamored by, it's just so overtaken by the fact that it is. That is enough. So anywhere you have Aries in your chart is where you are just content to be. You see? And Aries is an outgoing sign, because the first house is how to be is not a static thing, it's not a receptive thing. To be is an active impulse. Because to be is to emanate, is to come out. That is what it means. To open the door. So basically Aries represents the way you start anything. When you decide that, okay, when the impulse comes that I gotta move, the way you move, how you move, it's all Aries. You see? And so the sign Aries, which naturally sits on the cusp of the first house, is the active impulse. The house itself is the passive impulse, because Aries gives and the house receives. That's the difference between signs and houses. Signs pushing energies, or for lack of a better word, energy, okay? But it's not really energy. It's psychic. You could call it psychic energy. Aries pushes in a type of psychic energy that the first house expects and receives. Now, if you have a different sign on the cusp of the first house, it doesn't matter. It is still a house. It is a house that determines, because the house is looking for what Aries has to offer. So for instance, if you have Scorpio on the cusp of the first house, which is your Scorpio ascendant, it means that your manner of being, your manner of opening that door and coming out is as a Scorpio. So Aries will try to take the first house, will try to take those qualities and characteristics from Scorpio. That's what it will try to take from. So however Scorpio would have to mimic Aries. And it is those qualities that Scorpio is able to mimic in the form of Aries that are selected for in the first house. So the houses select what they want based on the area of human experience that they represent. That's really what it is. So Aries gives the impulse, the psychic impulse to move. The first house expects such a psychic impulse, and so that's why they call it's a natural match. Okay? Now, from Aries, so planets in that first house, they modify this ability of the house, because planets only affect the houses. Planets do not affect signs. You see?